There's never been a better time to have SiriusXM. With even more exclusive content, with over 150 channels in your vehicle, including the widest, deepest variety of music, ad-free. Root for your team. Get news. Listen to whatever makes you laugh. And hear all about your favorite stars. Your Platinum Plan offer includes more than ever before to enjoy online, on your phone, or at home. Create your own ad-free personalized stations powered by Pandora. Hear ad-free extra channels filled with music and enjoy favorite shows with SiriusXM Video. Thousands of hours of shows and performances on demand. What you love is on now.
When it comes to audiophile grade equipment, Europe has had a huge stake in this segment for many, many years. And today we're going to take a little trip, more specifically to Italy, where a brand known as Hertz Audio resides. This is CMA Connected, presented by SiriusXM, Hertz Audio, and it starts now. What's going on, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another CMA Connected presented by SiriusXM. I am your host, Ben Wu, and we are continuing down the path of audiophile grade sound. This is, of course, a very, very fun session for me and for many of you out there. Thanks for tuning in each and every day. On the menu today, we are talking about Hertz Audio, yes, from the manufacturer known as Electromedia out of Italy. Hertz Audio is no stranger to the high-end audio game with several offerings in many categories, including full-range speakers, subwoofers, and yes, amplifiers as well. And I sure hope we're going to be covering each and every single one of them in great geeky detail today. But first, let's reach out to our partners in crime that are distributing Hertz Audio throughout the Canadian region. They are, of course, Automobility. First, starting with our good friend Phil Cameron, who is their product specialist. Phil, how are you today?
Doing fantastic.
We've got a couple other guests, but first, let me start with you, Phil. I know when you came back on, you were very excited to kind of get into the mode of all this great new gear, especially with having Ken Ward as a resource for training. What have you learned most, or what do you appreciate most in this journey for you getting back in tune with car audio and being involved with a brand like Hertz Audio?
There's so much that I've learned over the past couple of months when I came back, but we do carry some of the best car audio gear in the industry, and looking forward to another presentation from Ken.
Amazing.
Every time he speaks, I learn something new. Even if he speaks about something we spoke about before, I still learn something new. So
doesn't that seem to be the case? I would have to say I share the same sentiment with you. Now, I want to warn you and our viewers listening that I've kind of given Ken the go ahead to be Ken, unabridged, unleashed, unboxed. He's going to geek out harder than he normally is allowed to. So we've given him the permission. But before we get to that, let's also bring in another important player within the Automobility family. He's representing the firm. He's, of course, a product specialist and might I say, CMA veteran, Mr. Justin Bond. Please come on in, Justin. Mr.
Hey
Bond.
guys, how you doing?
I love the background. Love the background today.
It's music, right?
It is music. It's all about the music.
Yeah, totally.
So you heard what I said about Ken. I want to hear your take on it. This is kind of new for you too, right? I mean, you've spent a lot of your recent years representing many, many high-end brands, and now you've landed this position, which lets you play with this level of stuff. What's your feedback so far?
So, I mean, I think when we talk about the grade or the quality or the segment of the market that we're in, we're talking about constant innovation. We're talking about proprietary information and design and engineering and creation of new technologies and new materials, and then implemented at the finest level, right? And I think that's really kind of what separates the real players in this segment from the other people. Is there's not off-the-shelf stuff. It is built, it is designed, and it's all purpose driven. And to kind of be associated with Phil and with Ken, and to have the kind of support team available to that, it's for me, it's super exciting. I Ken and I probably talk more than he wishes we did. So, but yeah, to have that kind of support behind us, and like you said, when Ken is unapologetically Ken in these trainings, the transparency is there, right?
Yeah,
Ken
absolutely.
He'll talk about every part that's manufactured to do what it does and why it does that. It's not just a basket. It's not just a former. It's not, why was this part picked for this? And I think when we get to this level of price and of product and kind of what's required by it, or what people are chasing, I think everything matters, And so for me, it's been super exciting, and it's been fun to rock and roll on the other side. I'm loving it. It's great.
I guess before I bring Ken on, the one thing I wanted to kind of get your input on, both Phil and Justin, is, Ken is an incredible resource. And when we're talking about audiophile grade equipment, people are tuning in, if they're still with us or they're tuning into this, they expect a certain level of performance, ingenuity, quality, and all those features. And this is why these type of sessions that we have, we're going to go a little bit deeper than we normally do, because really when it comes to charging this kind of money to the customer and to be able to present it, these are the little things that make the difference. Do you agree? What do you think of that, Justin?
Oh, 100%. And I mean, the ability to convey that to help justify the price tag for our dealers or for people on the floor, I think is important. And you don't need to go full propeller head to talk to a person where they don't understand it. But I mean, keying in on some of the crucial aspects of these products help explain and attribute to the cost factor and the results and what to expect. You know what I mean? If I hold up a speaker and tell you it's $2,000 and just say, well, it's a speaker and it's expensive, so it's good. It's different than holding up a speaker and telling you, and that's $2,000, and explaining to you why it's $2,000, and maybe and the money came in from the R&D, from the development, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people forget about, is that the cost associated of manufacturing or research and design it often in our industry gets left behind, right? People think, oh, well, it just costs this. Well, why? The material's not expensive, but the countless hours of manpower and the teams and the equipment to be able to design it, that adds up fast, and you got to sell a whole lot of speakers to recuperate that investment.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's get the guru in with us today. Of course, no stranger to our CMA Networks platform. We're always a pleasure to have him here, representing Electromedia. He is the International Technical Marketing Manager. I've practiced that enough times to say that smoothly and without fault. His name is Ken Ward.
Hey, Ben. Hi, guys.
How are you, sir? Thank you for joining us once again. For you, a second session here during the audiophile sessions, of course, Ken. We really want Ken Ward at full optimum output today. No
well,
filters.
I'll try not to clip the microphone, but I appreciate the opportunity, because we do have a lot of things to talk about, and I'm going to dive into speakers a good bit today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll cover some DSP, I'll cover some amplification. The real focus that I want to dive into more deeply is speakers, because
and why is that?
Well, Electromedia got its start in making amplifiers, and for quite a while, the speakers were left to other companies, and strategically, the company felt that there were a lot of drivers out there being sold to car audio dealers that were really home audio drivers. And they weren't solving the problems, whether it was on a driver level or a system level, that car audio dealers were trying to solve. So what I'm going to dive into today is I'm going to talk a lot about Legend, because Mille Legend is the Hertz flagship, and it is really something that many more people can afford Mille Legend than some of the other flagship products that are out there in our category. and I want them to understand why. And then we'll see how that trickles down into Mille Pro. Some of that technology is used in Mille Pro, including our newest subwoofer. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Our newest award-winning subwoofer. So that's my plan for today.
That's a great plan. I've always wanted to learn dive a little bit deeper into, because I do see them a lot coming up on high-end installs right across the country. Yeah, they look really cool. I have a lot of questions. I know there's.
And you said I could use charts and graphs, so I've got charts and graphs today.
For the record, guys, I did say this, and I can't take it back. So expect a lot of fancy graphs, charts, and anything else in between. So on that note, let's go ahead and set you up, Ken. You've got a great presentation ahead. We're going to, Phil, myself, Justin, we're going to hang back, take notes. And when we circle back, I know that Phil, as usual, from the Auto Mobility Studio, has got some show and tell, so we can take a closer look at some of these products once we understand them first. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and bring up your presentation.
All right. So obviously I'm here with Hertz, which is a brand of electromedia, and we have a mobile group of products. In the last few years, we've also developed a marine and power sport category that's very powerful that we talk about a good bit here, and a motorcycle category. But for today, what we're really going to focus on is mobile. And this right here is the very first car audio speaker kit that we developed in the Hertz line back in 1998. And even back then, you can look at the tweeter and you can see that that tweeter looks unusual compared to a lot of the tweeters of the time. It's not just that it was small and had a neodymium magnet. It's pretty deep. And this really will be something that comes up in our conversation as we go. But I'm going to compare it to what we had about 25 years later. The development of the kit actually kicked off a few years before the announcement of the brand, and so there's a little squishiness in terms of the age of the brand compared to the age of the product line. But this, as you can see, we still, on a flagship speaker, we're not trying to make the smallest tweeter, and we're going to talk about why that is. And this kit did win an award. And so did I think this amplifier was in our first amplifier launch. We're going to talk a little bit about our amplifiers today. Excuse me. And in fact, you can see here, we've won a lot of awards over the years, and we're going to talk about some of the products that are still in our line that have won awards. The first thing I want to do here is talk about the H8 DSP. This one's been in the line for a little bit, and it's won an integration award from EISA. And this is software that a lot of people are familiar with. And you'll notice that we kind of have a theme in our DSP software for PC. There's a map of the car on the left. There's EQ at the bottom. There's level at the upper right. And there's crossovers in the middle. Now, let's see here. There we go. You can see up at the top, you can select your inputs. You can see the crossover is highlighted here. That's your individual level controls. They look a lot like the controls you'd see on a mixer board for pro audio. And then the H8 still uses our 1/3 octave RTA graphic equalizer. Sorry, 1/3 octave graphic equalizer. Now we've just introduced the S8. And the S8 is a big departure from the H8. It's not replacing the H8. They're living alongside each other. And I want to point out a couple of special things about it. It is much smaller, and it is intended to be able to be used in vehicles other than just cars. The board is treated with a conformal coating, similar to what you would see on a motorcycle alarm. The connectors are not marine grade, but it's suitable for motorcycles. And all the connections are on one side, which means it's much easier to put inside a tight spot on a fairing. You can set it up with a map of a car, map of a motorcycle. If you want to put it in a spacecraft, we have you can use the free mode. And we mentioned that the PCB has been coated, so you're going to be able to get years of use out of it. You're not going to have to worry about corrosion on the board. Now, it is high-res certified, and we are pursuing a strategy of getting high-res certification on new products wherever we can, because we want our dealers to not have to get up to their elbows talking about high resolution. We see some of the head unit companies putting high-res badges on a lot of very basic speakers, and we would like to make sure that rather than having to explain what the badge actually means, which is a little bit arcane. We just want our dealers to be able to say, yes, this is also certified. Is that important to you? It does have 6 channels in, and this is a big difference compared to the H8, which only has 4 channels in. This allows you to sum number of channels together, if you like. The mixer on this is actually something that you can control, which is a departure for us. In the past, all of our mixers were automatic, and now we're giving you the option of overriding the automatic setting and defining the percentage of each channel that you want to mix together. The S8 also has our USS loading circuit to prevent muting behaviors on OEM systems. This is something that has been added to the H8. So now both of our Hertz DSP processors have USS loading on the speaker level inputs. The S8 also has a dedicated pre-in, and this is something the H8 doesn't have unless you use the aux input on the H8. And then it has a SPDIF coaxial input that can get you up to 96K if you're using a digital signal. It does have 8 RCA outputs. They're all 4 volt capable, and there is a limiter built in that will prevent you from accidentally clipping the output of the S8 when you're tuning the system, which can be important in situations like motorcycles where you're wearing a helmet and you're driving down the road and you might not notice clipping at full output, but will help you stay out of there. Now, one thing that's a big departure for the S8 is that it's sort of an experiment in our part. We went ahead and did a Mac app, an Android app, and an iOS app for the S8. And we're going to see how that goes out in the market. We're going to see how dealers like it. It works over Bluetooth when you're using the iOS or the Android app. And then there's a connector for USB for using PC software. And there is in the smartphone app, there is a DRC control function. So if you want to have a DRC, you can use your smartphone. You don't need to install a knob on a motorcycle that wouldn't be weather resistant. And you can set up everything with either the PC software or the smartphone app. There is no restriction in functionality going one way or the other. And here is a cool photograph of using the iPad version of the app, which is you can kind of notice in this EQ curve in the picture, we use parametric equalization, but we use it as an option. So each of the bands is a graphic band unless you right click or hold on it, and then you can get into a deeper layer of control. And these are the screens that you would have on the smartphone apps. Now, DRC screen is on the left. The individual channel EQ and crossover and level screen is in the middle, and then the overall level screen is on the right. That's the PC software. You can see that it resembles the H8 software and that there's a map of the vehicle on the left, there's EQ at the bottom, there's level crossovers. It will be familiar to a dealer who has used the H8 before. Now let's talk about mobile and talk about speakers, and then after that we'll talk about amplifiers for just a couple of minutes. And this is where we build all our speakers. This is our factory, or the La Voce division, really, of our company. It's a very important division of our company. And aside from our car audio speakers, it builds pro audio drivers for our own brand and for several customers, including Dolby and a few other pro audio companies that I can't mention. We've developed our own in-house software that allows us to model speakers. We actually have a member of our team who is a multi-decade veteran of loudspeaker development, and he was explaining to me how faster we can test and model speakers than we could at the beginning of his career because of the software that we have developed. We do use Clipple prototype testing and manufacturing testing equipment. So all of the speakers you see here, when they come off the production line, they have gone through a complete distortion test. Now, before I talk about our speakers specifically, I'm going to talk about some acoustic principles for a moment. And then when I talk about the speakers, hopefully the aspects of the speakers will make more sense. So if you've got a speaker, and this here is one of our 6.5-inch drivers, there's a thing called dispersion that talks about which direction the sound will emit from the speaker. And for a 6.5, you've got a range that is omnidirectional, where if you're operating in this range, it doesn't matter which direction the speaker is aimed, it will sound the same. And then above that range, we get into something that I call the narrowing range. And the narrowing range means that the speaker will sound slightly different if it's aimed at us than it will if it's aimed away from us. And then finally, we will get into a range above that that I call the beaming range, where the speaker will only sound clear at those frequencies if it is aimed directly at us. And this principle is really important in car audio for two reasons. One reason is when you put a speaker in a car, oftentimes you have to put a 6.5-inch speaker at the bottom of the door. And depending on the frequencies involved, we may have a problem hearing some of those frequencies when it's in the bottom of the door. And this is really, really different from where many of us have an opportunity to evaluate speakers, because many of us, including our clients, often evaluate speakers in a display board at eye level aimed directly at us. And so the experience of evaluating a speaker in that situation is really different than listening to it in a car. And we, as a company, have taken what turns out to be an innovative position where we really want our stuff to sound good in a car. And you would think that everybody in our industry wants things to sound good in a car, but it turns out that if you don't maximize the board performance, it can be difficult for some speakers to actually ever get installed in a car. So it turns out we have several category occupants whose focus is the display board and not the performance after installation. And I wish this didn't make us special, but it turns out that it does. Now, with a 6.5, these ranges will fall into the following frequencies. Omnidirectional will be up to 500 to 1,000 cycles, depending on the specific design of the speaker. The upper end of that range will vary a little bit, but it's going to be somewhere between 500 and 1,000. Below that, the speaker will sound the same regardless of which direction it is aimed. Now, when you get up to 1,000 to 2,000 cycles, 6.5 start to see a little bit of roll off depending on the design. And above that, you will start to get into the beaming territory for most 6.5s. And I'm going to give you another graph to try to show you how this works. This is not one of our speakers. This is a very, very old and respected home audio 6.5 that has been around forever. And the three lines signify, the black line is how it sounds when it's aimed at you, like if you used it in a home audio speaker, or if you put it in one of our display boards in many of our stores. The green line is how it sounds about 30 degrees off axis. And that roughly describes how it sounds from the passenger door if you're seated in the driver's seat. The red line describes 60 degrees off axis. And in many cases, the driver speaker relative to the driver is even more than 60 degrees off axis. Sometimes it's close to 80, but we're going to use the red line to describe how it performs from the driver's seat when the speaker's in the driver's door. And you can see that up to a certain point, they track each other pretty well. And I'm going to call that the omnidirectional range. And within that gray square, it doesn't matter which direction you point the speaker. And in this particular speaker, it looks like they're pretty close up to around 800 or so. And above 800 Hertz, you can see they start to diverge a little bit. We'll call that first area there the narrowing, where it will get quieter in that band, which goes up to, with this speaker, around 2,000 Hertz. Up to around 2,000 Hertz, there's a little bit of difference between 0 degrees, 30 degrees, and 60 degrees. So this means two things in a car. It means that the mid-range will be somewhat more distant and muted in a car. And it means that the mid-range will not sound the same on the left and the right sides. This is one of the reasons that our DSPs allow you to EQ the left and the right side differently, so that if you're trying to get the best performance at the driver's seat, we can get that for you. Now, when you get above 2,000, this is what I call the beaming area, where you get decent performance at most frequencies if it's aimed at you, but if it's not aimed at you, you really are seeing a deterioration in the output level of the speaker. Now, why does all this matter? I'm glad you asked. Um, if we look at this chart and we compare it to a 6 and tweeter component set, because a 6 and tweeter component set is the most common speaker kit in our industry. It is the most common speaker kit used by OEMs, and it's the most commonly sold speaker kit, regardless of brand, in the auto sound category. And if you do an audit of the average tweeter crossover point in our industry, which I did a few years ago, it turns out to be around 5,000 cycles from a 6.5 to a tweeter. And if you look at this chart here, you can see that if you limit the tweeter to playing 5,000 cycles and above, there's a significant deterioration in performance at the top end of the 6.5. And there's a significant deterioration in performance between the left speaker, the red line, and the green speaker line, which is the right speaker. So there's a big vulnerability or a big weakness in a 6 and tweeter kit with a 5,000 hertz crossover point. Now, fortunately, I don't even think we have any speakers at all that use that crossover, because it's a big deal to us to go lower than that. And what we'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and move the crossover down to 3,000 or so. And with this particular 6.5, you still have some weakness, but it isn't as bad as it was at 5,000. And we do have some speakers in the middle of our line that use a crossover point around here. Now I'm going to show you a 2,500 hertz crossover point. And at 2,500 hertz crossover point, you can see that the three different lines, while they are separate, they're pretty close. So we have really managed this dispersion problem with a 2,500 hertz crossover point using this home audio driver. Now we get to 1,800 cycles, and most tweeters cannot play down to 1,800 cycles without blowing themselves up. And most speaker brands don't have a tweeter that can play this low that they can offer you. But we're going to show you in a bit why we showed you this chart, because we do have a tweeter that can play to 1,800 cycles. And so I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Now, if you actually use a three-way kit, and we do have a couple of three-way kit possibilities within the Hertz brand, you can see the reason that you use a three-way kit, because you can cross over the top end of the 6.5 so low that you have completely avoided the dispersion problem. And in this scenario here, the the mid bass from the 6.5 will be the same left and right, and you won't have an asymmetric performance problem in the car. So I'm going to show you this again. I think this is a really important point. So I want to show you what it looks like in a car cabin. If you have a 6-door of average car and you're looking at 550 hertz, those 6.5s are going to sound the same left and right, and the sound's going to go everywhere in the car. If you go to 1,500 hertz, suddenly the sound isn't going to be quite as good, but they're still left and right. The 6.5s are playing it. Now, if you ask the 6.5 to play 3,000 hertz, it's going to do its best shooting that sound directly into your leg, but it's not going to do as good a job necessarily of getting it up to your ears. You get up to 4,500 hertz, and now it's a laser beam pointed into your ankle. And the left and the right channel will sound significantly different. So hopefully that makes sense, because now we're going to go ahead and talk about some speakers. But this right here, this graph is a different 6.5. This is from the same home audio company, but this was a 6.5 that was designed for off-axis performance. And you can see on this one, the way they got a decent looking green line was by letting the black line be obnoxiously loud. And this is a tricky technology to try to use, because if you put that speaker in a situation where it's pointing at you, you can see that it will sound screechy and harsh up there. And you still have a difference between the green line and the red line. So you still don't have a symmetrical performance left and right if you're using this approach to try to get car audio sound. So now let's talk about Hertz speakers. So a quick overview of our line. We're going to focus on Mille today. We start at Uno, we go to 10, then we go to Cento, then we go to Mille. And Mille is 1,000 in Italian, Cento is 100, 10 is 10, and Uno is 1. Now that we've cracked that code, I'm going to go ahead and talk about Mille. And the top of our Mille line is Legend, and I'm going to talk about some design elements that are common to every single Hertz Mille Legend speaker that has a neodymium magnet. There is only one speaker in the Mille line that this won't apply to, and that is an entry-level kit for the Mille line anyway, that has a ferrite magnet on the 6.5. So I'm going to depend on you to manage this a little bit, and I'm going to show you specifically driver by driver which drivers have which. And once again, these are not just developed with Klippel technology, they're also manufactured and tested, each driver with Klippel manufacturing technology. So inside the motor system, this is a really cool picture that we have for a lot of our Legend drivers that shows you the cutaway of the motor system. And the first thing that's really important to me is inductance management. And I hope you can see my my cursor here. I don't think you can. There, you can see the voice coil attached to the bottom of the cone, and then you can see what looks like a flat ring, a silver flat ring that is around the outside of the voice coil inside the magnetic gap. And that's a huge aluminum ring that is for inductance management. Some people call it a Faraday ring. Some people call it a shorting ring, although it doesn't short the speaker the way we often use the term. But it affects the magnetic field, and it affects the inductance that is created by the motion of the coil within the magnetic field. It reduces distortion, and it improves high frequency performance of a cone driver. And it's something that you only see in the highest performance drivers. It's something that is in every Legend driver, and we'll talk about that in a moment, even our subs. We also use oversized voice coils. Now, we've tested with our modeling software where we wanted to land on the spectrum of oversized voice coils. We've seen some pretty huge voice coils out there. And it turns out, with the exception of our subwoofer, we didn't land on putting the largest voice coil possible because it just adds a lot of moving mass. And so we think that this oversized voice coil here, the standard voice coil for a 6.5 is 1 inch, 25 millimeters. And this is 36 in this particular picture. And this is pretty representative of what we've done. Now, there's a tech that we use in these called boundary-free surrounds. If you're just buying a surround off the shelf, it's basically a half circle of rubber or some sort of foam material. And if you look carefully at this V and you look at this cutaway, you can see the inner part of the boundary-free surround actually is parallel to the cone. Excuse me. And we did that to make sure that the surround contributed to the overall SD or cone area of the driver. And this helps us get just a little bit more output for free, which can be really important in a car. You can also see in the cross-section cone that we use the V cone in our Mille speakers, and in the Legend speakers, we use a one-piece V cone where the cone and the dust cap assembly are all one continuous piece. And I'll show you when we look at some of the charts what this does for our high frequency performance. It turns out that a lot of speakers will end up with some distortion contributions from the dust cap, and you will always have some sort of breakup modes from the area where the dust cap is mounted to the speaker, but you have to manage those. How you design the speaker is how you manage those outputs, because no speaker is literally perfect. We have to manage the outputs that we don't want from it. So this is the ML1650, and this is our flagship 6.5-inch mid-bass in the Legend line. And you can see in this picture, looking at the back, the magnet is not very large, and that's because we use neodymium. Neodymium is very common in tweeters. It's very, very rare in 6.5s. It's very, very rare in cone speakers overall. And it costs a good bit. And it also costs a good bit to own the magnetizing machine that is able to impart magnetism to a neodymium slug. So that's the first thing we did here. And we did this so that you could fit the speaker in the door. Well, we understand that we're a car audio manufacturer, not a home audio manufacturer for this speaker. And so if we make a speaker that sounds incredible and you can't fit it around the window regulator mechanism, we've got a problem. So that's the first thing that you see here. You can't really tell this in the picture, but we used a special low carbon mild steel material in the top plate and the back plate, which has a different level of magnetic permeability, and that really helps channel the flux where we need it to be. In this cutaway, you can see that we have a Faraday ring or a shorting sleeve right here that channels our magnetism, and that gives us the inductance characteristics that we want. And I'll show you on the frequency response chart what that does for us. There is a 36 millimeter voice coil made with copper clad aluminum wire. We've talked before about how copper clad aluminum in a power delivery tests out to require a larger wire than pure copper, but copper clad aluminum is much lighter, and that's why it's a really good voice coil material. It does use the boundary free surround. We talked about that. And the V-cone in this application is made with a cotton fiber mixed into the paper to make it lighter and reduce the moving mass. And the cast frame is something that is throughout the Mille line. A cast frame does a couple of things for us. One thing it does is allow us to maintain precise tolerances even when you're driving down the road with vibration. Another thing that it does is prevent any sort of deformation when we're mounting it to the door or to the spacer that we had to make to mount the speaker into the door, because as the pros watching this know, very few speaker mounts in doors anymore give us a nice round mount. We often have to make something that will allow the speaker to fit. So this is a frequency response chart of the 1650, and you can see on this chart that we've got a flat line going to up to about 2000 hertz. And then at 2000 hertz, you can see that we have these two lines diverging. The solid line is pretty flat up to about 7500 or 8000 hertz, which is unheard of in a 6.5. But when you look at the dotted line, you can see that we get out to about 2500 before we start to tail off. And really, we do have a lower output around 5000. So this 6.5, if we had a tweeter that was crossed over at 5000 and we didn't have a three-way kit with a mid-range, this 6.5 would have a weakness at the very top end of its response. But it does play significantly higher, even off axis, than the home audio driver I showed you at the beginning. And we're going to circle back and show you this more about this in a moment. But for now, I'm going to talk about the flagship tweeter in the Mille Legend range, which is the ML280. And if you've seen it before, you know that this picture makes it look fairly large, and it's not a small tweeter. It does also have a neodymium magnet. That's pretty common in tweeters, but the magnet we used here was pretty large. We do have a copper shorting ring in here. In the 1650, it was aluminum. In the 280, it's copper. You can see that it's just next to the voice coil. There was a lot of different techniques to manage inductance that we use in the Legend line. This copper ring adds to the complexity and the cost of the overall speaker. The dome is actually a 35 millimeter dome. You don't want to be thrown off by the fact that the part number says 280. You might think it's a 28 millimeter dome. It's actually a 28 millimeter voice coil attached to a 35 millimeter dome. The Tedalon fabric in the dome is a silk cotton a mix to help it be lighter. And once again, the voice coil is copper clad aluminum. The faceplate from this angle, you can see that the faceplate is not flat. It actually has a bit of a bevel around it, and this acts almost like a mini waveguide for the cone of the speaker. So it's not just for looks, it also affects the output of the speaker. Every part in that picture, except for the neodymium magnet and the copper parts, are made out of a solid aluminum frame, which also includes the chamber on the back. We've got damping underneath the dome, and we've got damping also in the rear chamber. Now, if you've worked with subwoofer enclosures for some time, you know that if you have a really small sealed enclosure and you want it to behave like a slightly larger sealed enclosure when in conjunction with the speaker, you will put some damping material in the enclosure, and that will get you 10 or 15% more apparent volume because of the adiabatic performance of the damping material in the enclosure. So in this situation, We've done the same thing with the tweeter that we often do with subwoofers, and that helps extend the low frequency performance of the 280. I'll show you a chart in just a moment. And hey, there's the chart. So first off, I want to show you the orange line. And the orange line is the impedance of the speaker. The peak in the impedance is what tells us the resonant frequency of the speaker. And in this case, it's 900 Hertz. That's an incredibly low mechanical resonance for a tweeter, but that's what allows us to play this tweeter down to 1800 Hertz in an active configuration. Now, if you look at this tweeter, you can see that it actually has a bit of a rising response from 1000 Hertz up to about 10,000 Hertz. It's not dramatic, it's gentle, but you can see it's a bit of a rising response. And then it's flat from 10,000 to 20,000. And you can see that on axis, we actually have significant output all the way to 30,000, which is where this chart stops. Now, off axis, you can see that we're flat from about 1,000 all the way to about 1,800. There's a little jiggle at 1,800, but we have meaningful output and flat response from this tweeter all the way to 20K in an off-axis installation. Now, this is important for dealers to note because sometimes with a tweeter at this price point, shop may believe that they have to build fabricated mounts to get good performance out of a tweeter at this price point so that it is on axis. And we agree that if you go to that level of fabrication, you will get the best performance from your tweeter in the very upper region. But we want people to understand that the reason this tweeter was built the way it was is so that if you put it in an off-axis position, you still get good performance from it. So we appreciate that many of our dealers have the ability to fabricate beautiful tweeter mounts, and we appreciate that they've got a clientele who will pay them to do so. But if you've got an opportunity to sell this tweeter and you can't fit that into the budget, we want you to understand the performance characteristics of this tweeter. Now, that said, I'm going to overlay the performance of the ML280 and the performance of the 1650 on top of each other. And this is a little bit confusing to look at. My apologies. The graphs do not have the same horizontal resolution, so I had to distort one of them to make the lines match on top of each other. But you can see here that if you look at the 2500 Hertz point, you can see that our tweeter is playing strongly all the way down to 2500, plays well below 2500. And you can see that our 6.5 is playing flat to 2500. So if we were to use a 2500 Hertz crossover point in this situation, we would have, and I don't like to use this word if it's not merited, but we would have a seamless transition from the output of the 6.5 to the output of the tweeter. And we do, because the 1650 and the 280, you can purchase those in a la carte mode and set them up in an active system if you like. And in that situation, you can run a crossover as low as 1800 cycles. But if you buy a kit that comes with them, if you buy the kit where they come together, the passive crossover operates at 2500. And once again, most speakers would be doing this at 2500, but the Mille Legend two-way kit in the 1650 will do this at 2500. That's the advantage of the walk I've just taken you on to explain why we built these speakers the way we did. And in so doing, this is the kit I was talking about, the MLK 1650.3. And this won an in-car speaker system award the year it was introduced. And one of the reasons is that off-axis performance that it delivers. So thanks for sticking with me through that. I know it was a long walk. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the ML700, which is the Legend 3-inch or 70 millimeter mid-range. It's got a neodymium magnet because we've got to fit it in the dash. It's got a copper shorting sleeve that is actually probably the largest inductance management ring of anything other than the mid-woofers. And it added significantly to the cost of the ML700, but it really gives us a great performance payoff. It also uses a single layer voice coil. You can get greater power handling with multiple layers of voice coil, but it also raises your inductance quite a bit. And if you're worried about upper frequency performance, you will get the best inductance characteristics out of a single layer voice coil. It does use the boundary-free surround. It does use the V-cone with cotton fiber that we talked about in the ML1650, and it does use a cast frame. Now, here's the frequency response of the ML700. And you can see on this chart, it is almost perfectly matched all the way to 3,000 cycles. It starts to diverge a little bit around 4,000 cycles. If you get above 5,000 cycles, you can see that this speaker off axis would have a lower output. If it was on axis, you would actually have to EQ it down a little bit. I do know some people that have used this speaker in a wideband application. That's not really its design intent, but you can do it. And I've seen people use this as a mid-range in a center channel in some upmix cars, and it will do that for you. But if you can get this 3-inch mid into the car, it allows you to use a much higher crossover point on your tweeter and still get a louder system. This is available a la carte as a raw driver, but we do make a speaker kit called the MLK 700.3, which is the 3-inch mid, the ML280 tweeter, and a different passive crossover with a higher crossover point that allows you to put the 3 and the tweeter on a common shared channel. One way you would do that is if you were using a 5-channel amp and you wanted to use these speakers on channels 1 and 2, you wanted to put a mid bass on channels 3 and 4, but not use a passive crossover for that management, because the lower the passive crossover frequency, the larger the passive crossover components need to be. So if you can get the passive crossover components out of the signal path of the mid-range speaker, mid-bass speaker, you will get more mid-bass output. So the other reason we did this is that we wanted you to be able to select your mid-bass speaker. Obviously, we've got a great mid-bass speaker in the 1650. Turns out we also have a mid-bass speaker called the ML1800, which we classify as a 7-inch speaker. It only sounds like there's a half-inch difference between the 1650 and the 1800, but it's actually a good size mid-bass. And as you can see, it also uses a neodymium magnet system so that it does have a depth, not just the maximum depth, but also the profile of the depth allows you to fit it into almost any car door. A 7-inch mid isn't going to fit into every car door, but there's a lot of opportunities that you have to fit this into a car. I found that some dealers didn't know we had a 7-inch class mid bass. And so if you can imagine all the technology I talked about for the 1650 being in the 1800, then you've got it right. Slightly larger voice coil than the 1650. It's a 50 millimeter voice coil instead of a 36, but you still get the boundary-free surround, the V-cone, the cast frame. And when we look at the frequency response chart, you can see it gets to 2,000 cycles before the off-axis performance starts to take a dive. And at some point, that's going to happen just because of the size of the cone. So if it is in an on-axis situation, which would be really difficult with a 7-inch mid bass, you can see we get past 5,000, 6,000, no problem. But in this scenario, you could do an ML1800 and an ML280 in a fully active 1800 Hertz two-way alignment with no loss of performance. And I challenge you to find another brand that can do that. I've tried to do that with oversized mid bass in a two-way alignment, and I've been told it's going to be great. And that wasn't how it turned out. But if you need to do a 7 and a tweeter, this will work amazingly well. Of course, the best performance is going to be the ML1800 paired with a 700 mid-range and then a tweeter. Now, this is a subwoofer. In the cutaway, it kind of looks like a 3-inch mid-range. This is actually a 10-inch subwoofer. And I want to talk about this for a minute. And one of the reasons is it also won an EISA award the year it was introduced as the best in-car subwoofer for that year. It uses a neodymium magnet system. Now, if you look at it, you might not believe it because it looks pretty massive. But if this thing had a ferrite magnet, you couldn't fit the woofer in the hole in the box that you built. So this is a neodymium magnet system that helps. The motor is incredibly powerful. Now, you can look inside and you can see a massive shorting ring that's in there. Now, why are we using an inductance management ring on a subwoofer because we're not trying to improve its high frequency performance. So why are we doing it? Well, one reason is that you cannot filter out distortion that a subwoofer motor system creates with a crossover filter, because the distortion isn't coming from upstream. The distortion is being created by the mechanical movement of the speaker moving assembly. If we can control the distortion and minimize and reduce the distortion coming out of the subwoofer, we will make that subwoofer more effectively disappear as an audible source of sound. And this is more important today than it was back in decades ago when I started, because when I started, everything was a coupe or a sedan. And nowadays, not only do we have hatchbacks, we have a lot of SUVs and we have a lot of premium pickup trucks where the subwoofer is very close to us. In a pickup truck and a crew cab pickup truck, it's right behind our head and there's no rear seat blocking it to speak of. There's no trunk storage wall blocking it. If there's distortion coming out of out of that subwoofer, it is right behind our heads. And so the ML2500 has very low distortion outside its passband. And so if you put it in a vehicle where it's got a direct line of sight to the listener's ear, it is still going to disappear as a source of sound. Thanks for sticking with me there, because that was a bit of an explanation. It does have a 4-inch voice coil. You can see there it's a multi-layer 4-inch across voice coil. The back piece is vented. The pole piece is vented to get it cooling in there. And the back plate is also vented to relieve pressure. And this technology was done to make sure that we could have an incredibly high power handling. I don't even know if I have a slide that says the power handling, but I want to say that it's 600 watts RMS and 1200 watts peak for the ML2500. It's just a beast of a subwoofer. It does use the boundary-free surround to get a little extra surface area. And instead of cotton, the V-cone actually has a mineral injection into the cone to add stiffness without adding a lot of moving mass. We also make an ML2000, which is an 8-inch subwoofer, and it has all of the features I just talked about of the 2500, including the 100 millimeter 4-inch voice coil, but it's in an 8-inch. It's a great sounding speaker. I want to caution you, if you're going to use an ML2000, don't assume it has the same dimensions as other off-the-shelf 8-inch subs. Pull the tech sheet for the dimensions and the hole centers. The hole centers are slightly smaller than some of the off-the-shelf frames. And if you try to just drop this into an enclosure you built for some other subwoofer, the hole centers might not line up on the flange the way you expect. So pull the data sheet. This is a unique subwoofer with a unique frame. Now we're going to transition for a moment from the Legend. That's really the Legend speaker line. I'm going to talk now about the Mille Pro speaker line just for a couple of minutes. And that, when you look at the part number here, the P is for Pro. MP 28.3 means that it's a 28 millimeter driver. Although, once again, this has a 35 millimeter Tedalon dome. It also has a 28 millimeter voice coil. If you look at this cutaway, it looks an awful lot like the 280, the Legend 280 that we looked at a few minutes ago. But if you look very closely, you will notice two things. One of them is the housing for this speaker is made out of an injection molded polycarbonate, and it is not made out of aluminum. And there is no inductance shorting ring. It does have double neodymium magnets. It does have damping on the rear loading chamber. It does have the same 900 hertz resonant frequency at the low end as the ML280. But if you look at this chart, you'll see it doesn't play quite as high as the ML280. In fact, I'll lay the two on top of each other, and you can see that the ML280 has better high frequency and off-axis performance out to 20K. But the 28.3 is definitely available at a lower cost. So if you're building a system, that driver is available both in a kit and it's available a la carte. Now, the most popular tweeter in the Mille line is the 25.3, which is based on a tweeter we've had in the Hertz line for many years. We used to have it in the high energy line. and it has a 29 millimeter dome and a 25 millimeter voice coil, and it has a bit of a chamber on the back, although it isn't as effective. It's not as large a chamber as the ML280, and it doesn't give you the same resonance characteristics. Neodymium magnet, there's the chamber, the single air voice coil, damping underneath the dome. So if you get the performance of the MP25.3, a couple of things you want to notice. One is on axis, it gets just beyond 2K. Off axis, you do see a roll off in the upper octave between 10K and 20K. That's pretty common with the 25 millimeter cloud tweeter. You're going to get good performance off axis with this tweeter if you have some EQ that you can apply, and it will be slightly different for the left and the right sides. That's pretty common for tweeters overall. We don't want to assume that every tweeter has the performance of the Legend. That's just not the case. You can also notice that there's an unusual resonance pattern down at the 800 and then 1800 hertz area. That's because of the chamber being so small on the back to allow us to fit this tweeter into different places. You can cross this tweeter over around 3000, 3500 and get good performance from it. And I believe that's the crossover point that we use when we use this tweeter in the Mille Pro kits and also in the Cento Pro kits. Now, the MP70 is our 3-inch mid-range in the Pro line, and it does use the neodymium magnet that you see in the Legend. It uses a smaller voice coil. It does have the boundary-free surround and the 2-piece V-cone. If you doesn't have the inductance management of Legend, and that's why you see it doesn't play as high as the 700. Now, there's a couple of drivers that look very similar in the Pro line. They both have ferrite magnets. They have 2-piece V-cones instead of the 1-piece V-cone that you've seen, and they offer some of the performance of the Mille Legend, but at a lower price point and with a slightly more difficult installation because they don't use the neodymium magnet. So there are some situations where they might not fit. The DOT 3 is a 3-ohm driver, and it's intended to be paired with a sub. Doesn't play as low as the regular 165, which can play full range if you need it in certain applications. So now I'm going to talk about the Mille Pro subs, and that on the screen there is a Mille Pro 250, uses the same cast frame as the Legend subwoofer, but as you can see on the back, it has an oversized ferrite magnet rather than a neodymium magnet. Now, it has a vented backplate, but it is not a vented pole piece. That circle you see on the back is actually a foam pad, and you can see that there are small holes around the edge, but there's not a big hole in the center. The idea here is that because of the depth of the driver, if you have to put that magnet right up against the back wall of a subwoofer, that's what the foam disc is for, and it'll still get some cooling through the holes around the edge. Now, it has a 65 millimeter voice coil. It's a dual voice coil. You can get dual 2 or you can get dual 4. And it does use the boundary-free rubber surround, and it does use the V-cone, a single a V-cone with the integrated dust cap that has the mineral injection like the Legend. And there is a 12-inch version as well. The 300 has all the same features as the 250, just in a 12-inch version. Now, I also want to talk about the MPS 250. This is the newest subwoofer in our lineup, and it just won an award as well as Best in-Car Subwoofer. And so I want to give you a little bit of a highlight here before we talk about amps and send you guys on your way. The Mille Pro subwoofers we have in a 10-inch and a 12-inch model, the 250 and the 300, and they're both available in single voice coil models, 2-ohm or 4-ohm. And the grills are included. We heard that in where these are getting used, grills were really important. So some of our speakers have optional grills, but these speakers actually have the grill in the kit. Excuse me. So the 250 has a really shallow overall depth, and it has 500 watts of continuous power handling with optimization for very small sealed enclosures. I believe the perfect enclosure is 0.5. We recommend 0.4 to 0.5. We've had dealers put it in 0.35, 0.34, and still get great performance. So it's an incredibly small enclosure that this thing needs. The mechanical excursion is great. We looked at flat subwoofers, including some flat subwoofers that we manufacture in other brands, and we decided that for Mille Pro we needed to have additional excursion, and 20% is definitely a material improvement in excursion. I should also mention that to the power handling. There's a 25% improvement in power handling to get to 500 watts continuous. I believe the peak there is 1,000. One of the ways we get the power handling is the die-cast frame. We also know that we can't afford to have the subwoofer tweaked when it's installed because of the enclosure. Sometimes when you're building really small corner-loaded fiberglass enclosures, you've used MDF ring, and when the fiberglass cures, it may have tweaked the surface of that ring a little bit, so it's not perfectly flat anymore. And if you mount a stamped frame woofer into that, it's going to torque itself to accommodate the surface of the ring. When you mount this woofer in, it's going to stiffen up the entire assembly, but it's not going to deform the geometry. There also is a really innovative cooling mechanism on the sides that cycles cool air in, makes sure that it gets warm before it's cycled out, and that's how we got the 25% improvement in electrical power handling. And you can see here in this little video that we made that as the air comes in, it's brought into that chamber. And when it comes into that chamber, that's when it warms up before it's expelled back out of the chamber and is replaced by cooler air. So the convection doesn't work in the traditional way where hot air rises and cooler air rushes in. We have to force the air out and forcibly draw new air in, and that's the way the vents on the side are designed. So the 6-layer copper voice coil is where we get the good electrical power handling, the high thermal capacity. This design of subwoofer only has 1.5 inch voice coil. It is 6 layers. And one of the reasons it's 6 layers is to make up for the fact that it's a small outer diameter. And we don't care about the high frequency performance, the inductance of the voice coil, because we're okay with the subwoofer not playing very high. It does not have a vent on the rear for the same reason as the Mille Pro woofer doesn't have a vent on the rear. That's why we vented it on the sides. The grill doesn't require screws. There are screws in the kit to mount the woofer, and they are black. I don't know that they're the cap screws that we have in these pictures. There are 8-gauge spring terminals to put subwoofer wire in that are spring-loaded on the edges of the frame right there. And it does use our EID code for, I should have mentioned this earlier, all of these speakers are covered by our EID program. The end user can scan it and register the warranty and double the warranty in Canada. So that said, we've got a 10-inch dual 2 or dual 4. We've gotten great feedback on these woofers. Like all ultra small box woofers, these are not highly sensitive. You need to make sure to give them plenty of power because we're in the 80s for sensitivity. And you can see that the X max is 16.8, and there's plenty of mechanical excursion above the X max for clearance if you have a customer that's really beating on that speaker. And then when we go up to the 12-inch, the 300, all the motor specifications are the same. The sensitivity is higher because the cone is bigger, but all the electrical numbers for the voice coil are identical. We can get this one down to 0.65 on the seal. It says 0.7 to 0.8. I need to revise that because the final numbers ended up being 0.65 to 0.7, which is unheard of for a 12-inch woofer in my experience. So here are the numbers for that the 10 and the 12. And that's a really exciting stuff that soon, later this year, we should, probably around the end of the year, we're going to see these available in preloaded enclosures. We're going to have a preloaded enclosure that is very high, build quality is very high. I've had an opportunity to tune a car that had one of these in it in Italy, and it sounded great, and I actually went back there and manhandled it to make sure how it felt, and it's just a really well-built subwoofer enclosure. The wood thickness on everything but the baffle is 15 millimeters, and there's a lot of bracing internally. It's got round corners. If you don't put the feet on it, some people are actually cramming this into some spots behind panels. And there's a lot of damping in the enclosure. And then we've got the same mounting system we've used in some other preloaded enclosures where you can use a 4-pin Molex. The 4-pin Molex actually lets you double up on the speaker wires, or you can use the spring terminals. Now, because the feet are in the box, we have a system that we call S2S2, which is either up firing or down firing. And if it's down firing, then that is the blue line on this chart. And you get more low end output if you're down firing. And you can also put it in a hatch, SUV, or trunk. And it doesn't have any problem with you setting groceries on top of it. It becomes part of the load floor. It actually has material on the feet like a dual lock to keep it from sliding around inside a trunk. Now, if you decide to fire it without the down firing feet, if you have it facing up or sideways, that's the red line. You can see with the red line, you don't get quite as much low frequency output, but you do get a little more higher frequency output. Now, when I say high frequency, I mean coming out of a subwoofer. So it contributes more mid-bass impact in that situation. And you can run it either way, whatever works for you. If you've got a cargo area where you can put this underneath in the spare area, or if you've got an SUV where this fits behind the side panel, I think this would fit in some Range Rover side panels. You've got a lot of flexibility. So there will be a 10-inch sealed and there will be a 12-inch sealed, and you can look for those. I believe they're on the website now. I don't think they'll be available in North America until toward the end of the year. Now let's just spend a minute talking about Mille Power. And Mille Power is a 3 amplifier family of amps that we came out with a couple of years ago so that we had performance that was, we wanted to have amplifiers that you could drive Legend speakers with. Let's put it really bluntly. We wanted to make sure that we had amplifiers that were capable of matching up to our speakers. So let's see here. We've got, they're made to work with Mille speakers. They are all D-class. One of the things that we saw when we designed these amplifiers was that D-class's power density was really a big ask from dealers. And so these are all D-class amplifiers. And they do have a really advanced crossover complement. So if you have a situation where you're not using DSP, or maybe you're using DSP in a head unit, it's not that advanced, you do have some really good filter options in these amplifiers. There is a Mille Power 1, which is 1,000 watts into 1 ohm. There is a Mille Power 4, which is 250 by 4 into 2 ohms. In a 4 ohm load, it is a 150 by 4. I have to say, I think this one's my favorite because it is very flexible. And then we have a Mille Power 5, which is 100 watts by 4 into 2 ohms, 75 by 4 into 4 ohms, and then 550 watts to a 2 ohm sub. So of these, you can take a Mille Power 4, bridge it down to 2 channels that are 500 watts per channel into a 4 ohm load, and drive 2 subwoofers, 2 4 ohm subwoofers with that, and have 1,000 watt subwoofer amplifier in a smaller package than the Mille Power 1. And then you can use a matching Mille Power 4 on your front or your front and rear. It's a really flexible family of products. So the D-class is something that was really important in terms of getting the size that we wanted. We've got really good thermal efficiency. The heat sink doesn't require, basically these don't overheat is the takeaway from this slide. And then when we get into the filters, let's see here. Everything's on the top. It's not, you're not trying to stick your screwdriver in on the end plate here. And what you've got is you've got a, well, let's see, are we talking about the 5-channel here? You can do 12 dB or 24 dB. You can do low pass, high pass, or band pass on certain channels. I believe band pass on the 5-channel allows you to run 3 and 4 band pass, 1 and 2 high pass, and you can actually go up and do tweeter crossover points if need be there. And you can go to full range if you're going to use an external DSP. The LEDs actually give you good trouble codes if there's a problem in the wiring, if there's damage that happens to your installation and the amplifier has to go in to protect, it's going to tell you what happened and help you troubleshoot it. So the Mille Power 1 has a sub-level control optional, and it's 600 watts into a 4 ohm speaker, and it does 1,000 watts into 2 or 1. And the signal to noise is amazing for a D-class. Mille Power 4 actually has 150 by 4 into 4, 250 by 4 into 2, and you can bridge it to 500 by 2, and it's got an amazing signal to noise. And then there is also a subwoofer level option for the 5-channel amp where you can bridge it as a 3-channel if you want and make it 200 by 2 and 550 by 1 into 2 ohms. And it's got a great signal and noise. So there's the family of Mille power amplifiers. So we've covered our DSPs, we've covered our industry leading speakers, and we've covered the Mille power family of amplifiers. And so, Ben, as I like to say, other than that, I've got nothing.
Mr. Ward, I do appreciate the effort you put into that presentation. I think this is one of the best presentations that I've seen, or I've had the opportunity to sit in on, because of the detail that you went into. I don't know if my colleagues here agree. I would believe they do. Let's go ahead and take down this presentation. Let's discuss what's going on. And as promised, of course, we're going to take a look at some show and tell product as well. But if I may, and I will, make a couple of comments. I wrote down a couple of things that I was very impressed with this presentation. Number one, the intentful engineering behind how the drivers work with one another from a frequency, response, and performance level that you were brilliantly demonstrated with those charts. That is something to note, because all too often we get these speaker presentations and we talk about the great surround and the basket and, that type of thing. But it's nice to know that engineers at Hertz took the time to make sure that they are manufactured, engineered, and designed specifically to work seamlessly with one another. I wanted to take a second and talk about that.
Well, that's actually one of the things that, because I've been doing this a long time, when I looked at the Hertz speaker line and I looked at a lot of the performance numbers, I realized what the plan was. And when I actually started working with the company, I remember speaking to some of the engineers and saying, oh, so you did this and you did this and you did this. And they were just really excited that somebody was getting it. So that's one of the reasons that this position that I have was created, was to help get that message out. This is always a challenge for audio companies that are engineering focused, is making sure that the decisions that have been made that impart a cost to the product are understood and appreciated by people who are not everyday acoustic engineers. But they really did. They really had a plan, and it's a big jump for an amplifier company to decide that they're really going to become a speaker company who owns their own factory. And I'm pretty sure we can list the number of companies that have made that transition on the fingers of one hand. And so I'm really happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Justin, anything you'd like to add based on that presentation?
Well, like you said, when you talk about the way that it's purpose built, I mean, when we talk, quote unquote audiophile, one of the worst things that you can have is spending a lot of money on a stereo, getting in the car and listening to it, and being able to pinpoint or track or trace where the sound is coming from. Because that, at the end of the day, we do not want to be able to locate any speaker in the car, right? That is our goal. We want our image to be staged. We want it to be in the front. We want it to be like we're sitting at home in a chair in between two speakers, listening to, a well-recorded album or something. And because of the ability and the technology and how Hertz has built the speakers and allowing those tweeters to play as low as they do in a passive and active system, it really does increase the way that you can blend and the options you have. And like Ken said, most of you guys know me, especially out in Canada, and my opinion on giant pods in front of your face. Slam the brake on too hard and eat your 3-inch. And and I believe, compromise is there, but in this case, we are compromising location with the off-axis response, but we are not significantly sacrificing our frequency response or our quality or the money that we're spending. And I think it's the attention to detail and innovation that allows us to do that. And plus, I mean, when it comes to flagship products, very rarely is there a flagship product that carries you from amplifier to speaker to woofer, right? I mean, all the way through.
That's a fair point.
I've worked for other amazing brands in the past, but a lot of time it's brand A speaker with brand B amplifier, brand C DSP, and brand E subwoofer, right? Which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it just kind of goes forward.
I think from a dealer perspective, Justin, it allows you to really build that brand loyalty amongst your clientele. That if you can step them in a lower level, and maybe more entry level Hertz system, and then step them up, show them what's ahead, right? I did mention the top of this at 2 points, and I want to make that second point right here. I think it's perfect timing for it. The top line speakers, the one that's available a la carte or in a kit, neodymium magnets, those cast basket, they are lower profile. That is installer friendly. That's number one. But number two, I think it's so important that dealers, you mentioned soundboard, Ken. And yeah, okay, it's at your eye level. It's flat against the board. There's no angle to them. It's on axis for all intents purposes. But I think this type of speaker deserves, if you can, I would strongly recommend having a space whereby you can simulate, an off-axis, more realistic type of scenario, ideally in a demo car. But also, this is the type of product that you should have ready to go to put into the customer's hand, so they could feel the weight of it, so they could see and all these great talking points that Ken brought to light today, the engineering, all these little things. That's how you sell a top level speaker.
Do we have one of those, Phil?
This is exactly why I wanted to bring this up. Mr.
I
Phil, you're up.
I knew Ben was teeing it up here.
Yes,
it's
sir.
Funny, Ben. I had a boss who told me to stop taking things out of the box and handing them to customers until I explained to him why I was doing it, to make it real. And then he started doing it. So over to Phil. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish back in my 2-channel career that I could tear apart like a Wilson Watt puppy and show them what's inside, but I wasn't allowed. But anyhow. Phil, what you got for us?
Oh, I do have tons of goodies, and I'd like to say, Ken, I'm keeping all of those for samples to go in my car again, right?
Of course he is.
One of
How many cars do you have, Phil? How many cars do
Yeah.
you have? Because they seem to say that at every presentation.
I'm going to buy more cars. That's not
Gotcha.
an issue. But
Just one of
we
everything,
all
though.
heard it. Ken said it was okay, right?
We heard it on record.
Perfect.
Just
tell
one,
him
though,
I-
Phil.
Just
One
tell
6.5,
Rob I said it
one
was
booter.
fine.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you want to start with? I got some Legend subs. I got the 10, the 8, and I got the Mille Pro.
Why don't we start with this the speakers? What do you have for speakers?
6.5. I have it here. Let me just change camera angle so you can see the speaker and not my ugly mug. So there we go.
Let's full screen this, please. Let's take a closer look.
So that grill, Phil, is that plastic?
No, it's not.
It's metal. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. All right, talk us through, Ken. What are we looking at here?
Well, I believe that is an ML1650 mid bass, the flagship mid bass. Yep, there we have it. You can see the vent on the back, and the magnet is a reasonable depth, but it's a really, really narrow profile. This is something that I've tried to talk to people about over the years about speaker depth. The maximum depth is one thing, but how wide the diameter is that exists at that depth is something else. And this speaker has a very narrow magnet. It's a beautifully made speaker, and you can see the overall depth is not very great at all.
No, that's for an ultra high end speaker like that with the neo magnet and all the components, all the materials. That is very reasonable of a proposition for installation.
So
This is going to look great in my car.
Now, fortunately, the beautiful part on the back you won't be able to see in your car, but if you hold it on the side, on the edge like you did, you can see that you can see the magnet there in the stack. That's actually the magnet. Now, let's go ahead and, do you have the mid-range?
I only have the tweeter. I only took one kit out because the guys.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Looked at me very weird.
You can,
like,
if you notice on that speaker that we actually have to make sure that we show the value of the speaker, the grill or the logo is laser cut into the frame, and also it's into the grill.
Yes, nice detail.
So that's also done on the 3-inch mid-range. So if you build a pillar pod and you have a head strike incident, you're going to have Hertz on your forehead for a while.
Backwards.
So don't do that. But now if you pull out that ML280 tweeter, and one of the things that I hear from installers sometimes is it's hard to install because it's large. And my usual reply is, don't hate me because I'm beautiful. Because that's the point. The reason it's larger is because you don't have to install a mid-range. So we're eliminating a lot of work for you. But I do recommend when you install an ML280, you should charge the time it takes. Don't charge the time it takes to install an MP25 because that's a lot smaller tweeter, right? This requires some extra work, but it's still not that big compared to some other drivers I've seen out there. You can see how large the rear chamber is. It's a rear chamber that really makes a difference. And the grill is integrated. You can see the bars on the grill. It's an attractive speaker, but you're not going to dent that grill. And it's a big dome. The wires are already soldered on. And is the crossover out, by the way?
Of course I have the crossover. Come on.
Now, the passive crossovers are not used as often as they used to be, but you can see there's a lot of switches below that panel.
You want to see the switches? I'm ready.
Ooh, look at that. Those are big resistors. This is a point that I need to make about Hertz passive crossovers. Read the manual, because those switches come out of the box with most of our speakers, if not all.
And there's 5 of them. 5 switches.
Yeah. There are 5 switches. It's got the pancake, got the side to side, got the up and down. But anyway, you want to read the manual, because the default for those switches is the display board. And if you're putting it in a car and you want to know where to put the switches, you're going to have to read the manual. Don't put this in a car and leave all the switches in the default, because that's probably not right for the car you installed it in.
Very good.
All right. So
Thank
now,
you,
if you're feeling really strong, Phil, do you think you can lift that ML 2500? Use your legs, not your back.
Oh, you're gonna, yeah. Let me make some room here. I apologize, guys. You're gonna hear some background noise. This is a big boy.
Oh.
There we
All
go.
right. So that's.
I also want to make a comment here, Ken. I appreciate the extension of the cosmetic signature look between all the drivers. Like, they're part of the same family. I got a little bit of OCD. That bothers me sometimes when I'm buying the same series of something and they don't look the same amongst the family members. This is clearly
we talked about it.
Related.
The Italians believe that the appearance of a product is a way to communicate the value. And if you have a nice sounding amplifier in a black box with 90-degree sides, maybe it doesn't matter to some people, but I can talk till I'm blue in the face, and I will not communicate the inherent value of this speaker as effectively as looking at the beautiful speaker. Mm-hmm. That says volumes. And saying that, can you tilt it a little bit, Phil? I want to show that's the Neo Magnet. Cast
is that the 10?
Neo
Sorry,
Magnet.
is this the 10 we're looking at?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And that's the one that won the EISA award. And if you rotate it all the way over, we can see the back. You can see it does have a big old vent on the back. So you don't want to slam that right against the back wall of an enclosure. And then it's got the additional venting holes around the edges. So massive voice coil, massive power handling, and a 4 ohm load. If you need, you're going to need to use a big amp. We don't want you to use an amp that only develops good power into 1 ohm if you're using a 4 ohm driver. So plan ahead.
All right.
But this is a great sounding sub, and when I've had the opportunity to listen to this in various cars, one of the things that I really like is that it does seem to disappear as a source of sound.
Exactly to what Justin was saying. And finally, I believe one last item, and then we can wrap this up. The amplifier. I believe you have an amplifier there, Phil?
Of course I do. There we go.
Oh, they're not as big as I thought.
And this is a 5-channel, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a nice 5-channel amplifier, and you can run it using the crossovers that are built in, or you can use it using external crossovers. I've seen this run front and rear and sub. I've seen it run active 2-way front plus sub. I've seen it run active with the crossovers built in. All the power connections and speaker connections are on one end, and then the RCAs are on the other end. And this has been a workhorse amplifier for the last couple of years for a lot of our dealers. It's got a speaker level input. I will mention that we haven't added USS to this one yet. So for now, if you have a car with muting, you're probably going to need to use the USS widget in front of this amplifier. So plan ahead. But that's a small amplifier for what is basically, I want to say it's like 950 watts into 2 ohms.
Yeah, that's a lot of power for sure. Okay, thank you so much for playing Vanna White today, Phil.
Hey, that's my job, right? Make product look good.
So let's close this out. Ken, again, high-end sound via really beautifully engineered and designed speakers along with subs and the whole line. Last final message for dealers looking to maybe add or replace a line that they have in the higher echelon of offerings.
I would say that there's a lot of people that are out there wanting to get their line placed into your store, and everybody's got a story. What I think is that you want to figure out which stories really have some meat to them, and learn how they're going to help you make your customers happy.
Very best. And man, did you provide a lot of great selling points to put on during a demo, might I say. So rewatch this, guys. There's some great terminology, some great charts, and all the above. Thank you so much, Ken, for coming in, doing a remarkable job today on Hertz.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And on that note, Justin, we're going to say bye to you as well. Thank you for taking the time. Let's bring Phil back in so we can just close this out real quick and get the people the information that they need to maybe become the next Hertz audio dealer. Phil, come on back. You know, ability is kind of where it's at. Oh, what happened there? Let's bring Phil back. There you go. Okay. Let's give him the info. First and foremost, for information on Hertz audio product, you want to visit their website. It's an international website, so make sure you choose the right language, hertz-audio.com. That is the website. And as you can see with Phil's shirt and background, Audiomobility is the official distributor for Hertz Audio in Canada. Phil, you are touching and feeling those products. How can you translate that so we can close this up for dealers to understand the finish and the feel?
Well, just looking at the product, they look great, and you will anticipate them sounding great. And when you actually get to hear them, they will sound amazing. So
you agree with me with what I said? This is one of those things you need to put that in the customer's hand after you lay it here and kind of finish off that whole demonstration.
Yeah, you have to. And what I love about this presentation is Ken went into details to explain the why they did this and the what. Not just this is a good speaker, this is top of the line, costs this much, it will sound good. He went in all the details and explained why it will sound good, all the engineering behind it. It's just amazing. I love this. This is good. And
now go put that in one of your cars.
Of course I will. No worries. I'll buy another one.
Thanks so much, Phil. I'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
If you're into geeking out on audiophile grade gear, then you want to keep it locked here on CMA Networks the entire month, because we are in the middle of the Audiophile sessions right through till November 10th. Each and every day we focus on a unique high-end audio brand so that you can get all the nerdy information that you want and need to have right here on CMA Networks. Now, great contest. Not much time left to sign up. So if you've already know about it and you've hesitated or you've procrastinated, head over to cmanetworks.com/giveaway for the Master Tech Expo contest we're doing with 5-Axis Innovations and SiriusXM. 2 lucky winners, one from the US, one from Canada. Everything included, guys. Head over to cmanetworks.com/giveaway. And while you're there, click on Ken Ward. He's got a profile on cmanetworks.com. Check out all the videos about Hertz. Check out all the videos from Audiomobility. cmanetworks.com. It's where the 12-volt industry connects. That's it for this CMA Connected, presented by SiriusXM. I'm your host, Ben Wu. Until next time, we connect.
Stop it. Yo, roll it down. I am.
You don't need a car to listen to SiriusXM. You can listen anywhere. You know that, right?
What? Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Radio.
Kevin, you could use your phone.
What? What?
Alexa, play Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Radio on SiriusXM.
What?
This is how I know you're getting old. I guess that was it.
What?